A 2,000-year-old leather sandal sits in a museum case, looking like it was worn yesterday. Roman leather did not simply survive, it defied time itself. By the end of this journey, you will know the exact chemical and human secrets that made this possible. We are pulling back the curtain on a hidden world of powerful alchemy and forgotten craftsmanship, where the stench of the tannery built an empire and a gladiator's armor held stories of both spectacle and survival. How did a process reliant on urine and oak bark produce material so enduring? What can a single stitch in a child's shoe tell us about an entire civilization? The answers are tanned into every surviving scrap. What is the most fascinating use for leather you can think of? That sandal in the museum is not an isolated artifact. It is a single voice from a vast leather-bound chorus. To walk through a Roman city was to be surrounded by the material. The soldier marching on the cobblestones did so in thick-soled caligy, studded sandals that were as much a symbol of the legions as their eagle standards. The very tent he slept in under the stars was made from leather panels, waterproofed and durable. Back in the bustling forum, a merchant would seal his amphory of wine with leather stoppers, while the wealthy reclined on couches upholstered in dyed hides. Even the pipes that carried water into homes used leather washers to prevent leaks. In a world before plastics and synthetic fabrics, leather was the flexible, resilient workhorse of daily existence, as fundamental to Roman infrastructure as stone for their roads and iron for their tools. This very ubiquity is what makes the surviving pieces so incredibly precious. Stone endures, metal can be melted down and reused, but organic material like leather is food for time. It rots, it decays, it returns to the earth. So when archaeologists carefully brush the soil from a perfectly preserved child's shoe in the mud of a forgotten fort, or an intricate glove from a waterlogged well, they are not just finding an object. They are recovering a ghost of everyday life. That tiny shoe, with its careful stitching size for a toddler's foot, tells us more about family life on the frontier than a dozen official inscriptions. It speaks of care, of economy, of a parent preparing their child for a world both Roman and remote. Each surviving scrap is a direct, tactile connection to the people who made and used it, a silent story tanned into the very fibers. But this ghost of everyday life needs a place to speak. One of the most eloquent sites sits in the damp northern reaches of what was Roman Britain, at a fort called Vindolanda, clinging to the edge of Hadrian's Wall. The ground here holds a secret. It is not dry desert sand that preserved its treasures, but something far more surprising: water. For centuries, the anaerobic, oxygen-starved mud beneath the fort's floors and ditches created a perfect time capsule, halting the decay that would have consumed organic materials anywhere else. This waterlogged earth became a refrigerator for history, and what it preserved has utterly transformed our understanding of Roman life on the frontier. While Vindolanda is famous for its thin wooden writing tablets, personal letters that let us hear the voices of a commander's wife inviting friends to a birthday party, or a soldier requesting more socks, the true volume of the story is written in leather. Archaeologists have unearthed not dozens, but thousands upon thousands of leather artifacts from this one site. We are talking about a staggering collection of over 7,000 shoes alone, from hobnailed military boots to delicate indoor slippers. Alongside them are tents, horse harnesses, gloves, and countless tooled and stitched scraps. This is not a handful of rare museum pieces. This is a statistical sample, a complete cross-section of an entire community's leather consumption over generations. Each item is a data point. The wear patterns on a sole tell us about the cobblestones of the fort streets. The repair on a tent flap shows frugality and resourcefulness far from supply lines. The different styles and sizes of footwear paint a vivid picture of a bustling settlement full of soldiers, families, craftspeople, and children. Vindolanda's leather does not just show us objects, it shows us life in motion, frozen in the mud. It forms the undeniable core, the reference library against which every other Roman leather find in the world is compared. That statistical sample from Vindolanda, that library of everyday life, poses its own profound question. How did these objects, made from something as perishable as animal skin, survive 2 millennia in wet British mud? The answer lies in the very first and most important secret, a process so fundamental it was both an industry and an olfactory landmark in every Roman town. To understand Roman leather, you must first visit the tannery, and you must be prepared for the smell. This was not a subtle craft. The transformation from a raw, decomposing hide into a durable, flexible material was a battle against nature, fought with some of the most pungent ingredients imaginable. The journey began with a freshly slaughtered skin, still covered in flesh, fat, and hair. To make it workable, all of this organic matter had to be removed. The Romans employed a brutally effective method. They would soak the hides in large vats filled with a liquid solution. In some cases, this was a mixture of water and lime. But very often, they used what was readily available and highly alkaline, human or animal urine. The ammonia in the urine would slowly loosen the hair and degrade the flesh, a process that could take weeks. In other regions, they might use a paste of animal dung for a similar effect. Imagine the scent of these soaking pits under the sun, a sharp, eye-watering aroma that would have announced the tannery district long before you saw it. This was the unavoidable price of civilization's most versatile material. Once the hide was scraped clean of hair and residue, it was still just raw skin, prone to stiffening and rotting when wet. The next step was to stabilize it to begin the true transformation. One common preliminary method was called tawing. This involved rubbing the hide with a paste made from alum, a mineral salt, and sometimes other substances like flour and egg yolks. There is even evidence from other ancient cultures of using emulsified animal brains, rich in natural oils, to soften the fibers. Tawing produced a soft, white, pliable leather, excellent for gloves or fine garments. But it had a critical weakness. If it got wet, the alum would wash out and the leather would revert to a stiff, rawhide state. For the hard-wearing items that built an empire, the Romans needed something far more resilient. They needed a process that changed the very chemistry of the skin, making it permanently stable and resistant to water and decay. They needed vegetable tanning. This was the crowning achievement of their leathercraft. The tanners would transfer the prepared hides into a series of increasingly stronger pits or vats filled with a brew made from oak bark. Oak, and specifically the tannins within its bark, held the magic. Tannins are astringent plant compounds, the same thing that makes a strong cup of tea taste bitter. Over many months, sometimes even a full year, these tannins would slowly migrate into the very fibers of the hide. They would cross-link with the collagen proteins, creating a dense, non-biodegradable network. This process did more than just preserve the leather, it fundamentally altered it. The resulting material was tough, flexible, and remarkably resistant to moisture and microbial attack. It would not stiffen into a board when wet, nor would it rot away in the damp earth. The color was a rich, reddish brown, the classic hue we associate with ancient leather. This was the material of the legionaries' tent, the merchant's satchel, and the sandal that walked 1,000 Roman miles. The long, patient soak in the oak bark solution was the alchemy that turned a perishable hide into a historical artifact. It is the single most important reason why those shoes from Vindolanda were waiting in the mud for us to find them. Their stitches still intact, their soles still bearing the marks of ancient cobblestones. The tannin-rich brew worked its magic slowly over months, but the transformation of hide into leather was not a passive wait. It was a physical, demanding act of craftsmanship, a symphony of force and precision conducted with a specific set of tools. We often picture a tanner with just a sharp knife, but his toolkit was far more specialized, each instrument designed for a single, crucial step in the alchemy. After the hide emerged from the soaking pits, scraped clean of hair, it still had a fleshy underside that needed removal. For this, the tanner used a tool as simple as it was effective, the fleshing beam. This was a large, smooth log, often set at an angle on a sturdy frame. The worker would drape the heavy, wet hide over the beam, flesh side up, and use a two-handled scraping tool with a blunt, curved blade. Leaning his whole weight into it, he would push downward, peeling away the last remnants of fat and tissue. It was brutal, messy work that required immense strength and left the hide uniformly thin. But the Romans were masters of refinement. For finer scraping and finishing, they likely adapted a tool familiar from their bathhouses, the strigil. This curved metal scraper, used by athletes to clean oil and dirt from their skin, found a second life in the tannery. Its precise edge was perfect for delicately thinning areas or cleaning the grain side of a premium hide intended for officer's glove or a fine purse. Once scraped, the leather was still damp and pliable, and this was the moment to shape it. Wooden frames and stretching ropes were essential here. Hides were laced tightly onto these frames, pulling them taut as they dried to prevent shrinkage and curling, ensuring a flat, even sheet of material. But perhaps the most surprising tool was the mallet. This was not a small hammer, but a heavy wooden club, sometimes with a broad, flat face. The tanner would pound the dried leather relentlessly. While this pounding physically broke down the stiff fibers, making the leather supple and flexible, it was a process called staking, and the rhythmic thud of the mallet would have been the heartbeat of the workshop, the sound of toughness being softened into usability. Archaeologists have found these very tools, the worn handles of scrapers, the indentations on ancient beams, the rounded heads of mallets. When we see reconstructions of them in use, we see more than just old objects. We see the necessary violence of the craft, the applied force that turned a stiff hide into something that could flex with a soldier's stride or conform to the shape of a stored scroll. Each blow of that mallet was a conversation between the craftsman and the material, a final argument that prepared the leather for its long life of service. The mallet's pounding gave the leather its flexibility, but the true alchemy happened in the soaking pits. While oak bark was the empire's workhorse, the Roman world was vast and its tanners were resourceful chemists, adapting recipes to local landscapes. In the sun-baked eastern provinces where oak forests were scarce, they turned to another powerful source of tannins, the sumac shrub. Its leaves and berries could produce a fine, supple leather, often with a lighter, more golden hue, perfect for the luxurious goods traded along the Silk Road. In other regions, they exploited the peculiar power of oak galls, the hard, round growths formed on oak trees by wasp larvae. These galls are packed with concentrated tannins, capable of producing an exceptionally dark, almost black leather, highly prized for its rich color and durability. Even certain berries and barks from local trees were experimented with, each infusion imparting subtle differences in color, texture, and strength. This was not a one-size-fits-all process. It was a localized science, a dialogue between craftsmen and environment, but the recipe could go beyond plants. For leather destined for the rain-soaked frontiers of Britain or the decks of warships, mere vegetable tanning was not enough. Evidence suggests tanners employed post-tanning treatments for waterproofing. One method likely involved working fats or oils into the finished leather. Imagine a craftsman rubbing fish oil or animal fat deeply into a legionary's tent panel, his hands working the greasy mixture into every fiber to repel the relentless northern rains. This added layer of protection would have been the difference between a dry soldier and a miserable, sodden one, between a supple sail and a stiff, rotting one. All these variations lead to a tantalizing mystery. With so many possible ingredients and mixtures, did certain tanneries guard secret family recipes, passed from father to son like the formula for a prized perfume or a unique glass? Was the leather from a particular workshop in Pompeii known for its distinctive, fragrant softness, while the output from a tannery along the Rhine was famed for its rugged, water-shedding toughness? The archaeological record holds clues, but no written recipes survive. The competitive edge of a Roman tannery may have literally been buried in its vats, a proprietary blend of bark, gall, and oil that turned a simple hide into a superior product, and that secret died with the last craftsman who knew it. The rich brown from the oak bark vats was a baseline, not a boundary. Roman leather pulsed with color. Walk through a marketplace in Pompeii before its burial, and you would have seen a spectrum far beyond earthly tones. A merchant's awning might be dyed a deep sun-resistant red. A wealthy woman's purse could flash with a vibrant yellow. A cavalry officer's saddle might boast intricate tooling highlighted with blue and green. This polychrome world was achieved through a sophisticated understanding of dyes, both plant-based and mineral. For reds, the go-to source was madder root. When hides were treated with a mordant, a metallic salt like alum that helps fix the dye, and then soaked in a madder bath, they emerged a lasting brick-red hue. This was a color of prestige and power. There's strong evidence that red-dyed leather was reserved for military officers, centurions, and perhaps even the personal equipment of high-ranking officials. It was a visual command, setting leaders apart on the battlefield. Blues were more challenging but achievable. Woad, a plant that yields a blue dye, could be used on leather, though it often produced a subtler, grayish-blue tone. For more brilliant greens or blues, tanners sometimes turned to mineral pigments like verdigris, which is a green copper carbonate, or even precious ultramarine from crushed lapis lazuli for the most extravagant luxury items. These will be mixed into a paste and applied to the surface of already tanned leather, more like paint than a penetrating dye. The expense was staggering, making such items exclusive symbols of immense wealth. Color was never just decorative, it was a language. A red leather sword scabbard shouted authority. A pair of dyed and embroidered gloves in a lady's trousseau spoke of her family's standing. The vibrant trim on a ceremonial horse harness transformed the animal into a moving emblem of its owner's status, even in the military, color-coded function. Beyond officers' red, other shades might denote specific units or ranks within the complex hierarchy of the Legion. When we peel back the assumption of a monochrome brown world, we see a society that used color with deliberate intent, staining its most durable material with the very pigments of power, identity, and aspiration. That language of color and status was walked into the ground every single day. The most intimate and revealing leather artifacts from the Roman world are not the gilded saddles or the officers' red scabbards, but the shoes. Footwear is, by an overwhelming margin, the most common leather find at sites like Vindolanda, and each type is a clear social signature, a direct imprint of the person who wore it. For the Roman soldier, that signature was the caliga. This was not a delicate sandal, it was a heavy-duty, open-toed boot constructed from a single piece of thick, vegetable tanned leather, cut and laced up the center. The sole was a masterpiece of practical engineering, consisting of multiple layers of leather, often sandwiching a filler for cushioning, all riveted together with an array of iron hobnails. The pattern of these nails was not random. They were arranged for maximum grip and durability, creating a distinctive clatter on stone paving that announced the legionaries' presence. The caliga was built for miles, for variable terrain, and for the harsh reality of campaign life. Its open design allowed for ventilation, reducing the risk of trench foot, while the thick, nailed sole protected against sharp rocks and rough ground. When you see a replica of a caliga, you are looking at the foundation of Roman military mobility, but not every Roman stomped through mud and marched in formation. Step into a wealthier domus, a townhouse, and you would find a completely different shoe, the carbatina. This was a soft, slipper-like indoor shoe, often made from a single piece of fine leather, cut with decorative openwork and tied with delicate laces. It was about comfort and display, a sign that the wearer lived a life cushioned from the rough streets. Then, for formal public appearances, a Roman citizen of status would wear the calceus. This was a fully enclosed shoe, laced or strapped, often made from finer leather and sometimes even dyed. Certain styles and colors of calceus were legally restricted to specific social ranks, making your feet a direct advertisement of your place in the rigid hierarchy. A senator's shoes literally looked different from a merchant's, but the true magic happens when archaeologists look beyond the type and study the individual shoe itself. The wear patterns are like a biography written in scuffs and creases. A caliga sole recovered from a fort near a mountain pass might show extreme, asymmetrical wear on the outer edge, telling the story of a soldier who spent years patrolling steep, sloping paths. Another from a cavalryman's barracks might have less heel wear but distinct drag marks near the toe, from the unique posture of mounting and dismounting from a horse constantly. Even more poignant are the children's shoes, tiny carbatini, their soles barely marked, speak of a short, sheltered life indoors. A small caliga, however, found at a frontier fort with its hobnails worn evenly down, tells a different, more moving tale. It is the footprint of a military child, a boy or girl who grew up playing on the same rough cobblestones as the soldiers, perhaps the son of a centurion, mimicking his father's march until the leather conformed to the unique shape of his own growing foot. These are not just artifacts, they are preserved motion. They allow us to trace a single, anonymous individual's path through their world, from the wear on the ball of the foot to the repair stitched lovingly over a tiny hole. In the curve of a worn heel, we can almost hear the echo of their daily routine. The wear patterns on a sole tell one story, but the threads that hold it together tell another. If the tanning process gave Roman leather its lasting body, then the stitching was its enduring soul, the precise handwork detail that transformed a flat hide into a functional object. This was not haphazard sewing. The Romans employed a toolkit of threads and techniques, each chosen for its specific properties, creating seams that were engineering feats of strength and flexibility. For the heaviest duties, they turned to the most organic material imaginable, sinew. This is the long, tough tendon taken from along an animal's spine or legs. When carefully separated into strands, sinew is incredibly strong and crucially it shrinks as it dries. A craftsman would stitch a heavy tent panel or a saddle with a sinew thread while it was still damp. As the thread dried and contracted, it would pull the seam even tighter, creating a bond that was almost self-locking and highly resistant to unraveling. For less rigid applications like securing the upper of a sandal to its sole, they often used leather itself. Thin, pliable thongs cut from the hide's edge provided a durable, weather-resistant thread that would wear at a similar rate to the item itself, creating a unified, long-wearing whole. And for fine work such as a delicate glove or a decorative pouch, linen thread was the choice. Made from flax, it offered a smooth, strong fiber that allowed for tiny, precise stitches on premium leathers. The true sophistication, however, lies in the patterns they sewed. Roman leatherworkers were masters of seam construction. One of the most common and robust techniques was the butt seam. Here, two edges of leather are placed side by side, not overlapping and sewn together with a strong looping stitch. This created a flat, flexible join with no bulky ridge, perfect for items like water skins or flexible bags that needed to expand and contract without stress points. For joining larger panels or closing long edges, the running stitch was ubiquitous, but even this simple stitch was executed with purpose. The spacing, the tension, the angle of the needle's entry, all were controlled to distribute stress evenly along the seam. On military gear, you often find these stitches doubled back or reinforced at key points, an extra bit of security for an item that could mean life or death on campaign. This is where stitching becomes a language of its own. The quality of the work is a direct indicator of an item's value and intended use. Examine a common soldier's satchel from a frontier fort. The stitching is functional, strong, and consistent, but often utilitarian, with stitches spaced for speed and durability over aesthetics. Now compare it to a finely tooled purse found in a wealthy Pompeian home. The stitches are smaller, more numerous, and perfectly even, almost invisible against the dyed leather. This level of meticulous handwork represented hours of skilled labor, a cost only the affluent could bear. The thread choice tells a story too. A piece sewn with precious linen thread on a delicate, alum-tawed leather was meant for gentle indoor use, a luxury item from start to finish. The same item, if intended for hard service, will be made with stout vegetable tanned leather and sewn with sinew or a leather thong. By reading the seams, we can deduce not just what an object was, but the life it was expected to lead. A single repaired stitch on a worn child's shoe speaks of frugality and care. The flawless, unbroken seam on an officer's ceremonial horse frontlet whispers of prestige and untouched perfection. The threads that bound these objects were, in every sense, the bonds of Roman life, holding together everything from the empire's military machine to its most intimate personal treasures. Those threads of sinew and leather did not just bind sandals and satchels, they held the empire itself together on the battlefield. For a Roman legionary, leather was not a secondary material, it was an essential layer of survival, a silent partner in every clash of the shield wall. His iconic armor, the lorica segmentata, that famous segmented plate armor, would have been a clattering, bruising shell without its hidden leather heart. The steel plates themselves were riveted to a complex internal harness made entirely of sturdy leather straps. This harness allowed the rigid plates to flex and move with the soldier's body as he marched, raised his shield, or thrust his gladius. It distributed the weight of the metal across his shoulders and torso, turning a potential prison of steel into a functional second skin. Without that flexible leather framework, the armor would have been impossibly cumbersome, chafing and restricting movement until the soldier was exhausted before the fight even began. Beneath the clanging plates, another layer of leather provided crucial comfort and protection. This was the subormallis, a padded under-armor garment. Often made from layers of linen or wool quilted onto a leather backing, its primary job was shock absorption. When a sword blow or a deflected spear strike slammed against the outer armor, the force would ripple through the metal. The subormallis soaked up that impact, preventing bruises and broken ribs. It also served as a vital barrier, preventing the metal plates from rubbing the soldier's skin raw during long marches. Think of it as the ancient world's most advanced sports padding, a necessity for a professional soldier expected to endure hours of grueling exertion and violent contact. The protection extended to his very head. Inside the heavy iron helmet, the galea, was a leather lining. This wasn't just for comfort, though it certainly provided that against the unforgiving metal. The leather cap, often stitched in sections with a wool or hair stuffing, acted as a suspension system. It kept the helmet securely in place during violent movement, and more importantly, it helped dissipate the force of a blow. A direct hit to the helmet could still stun or concuss a soldier, but that leather lining meant the difference between a ringing headache and a cracked skull. His primary defense, the large rectangular scutum shield, also relied on leather. While the body was made of laminated wood, the edges were bound in leather to prevent splintering, and the entire face was often covered with a layer of thick hide. This leather covering did more than just protect the wood from moisture and sword cuts. It provided a surface onto which the legion's bold insignia could be painted, those famous eagles, wings, and lightning bolts that served as a rallying point in the dust and chaos of battle. Beyond the infantryman, leather was the unsung hero of the Roman cavalry. A cavalryman's effectiveness depended entirely on his control and stability atop a moving horse. His saddle, the Roman four-horn saddle, was a masterpiece of leather engineering. It had no stirrups, which were not yet invented. Instead, it was crafted from a wooden frame tightly covered in leather, with 4 prominent pommels, 2 at the front and 2 at the back. The rider was effectively cradled and gripped by these leather-covered horns, giving him a secure seat for thrusting with a spear or cutting with a long sword. The saddle was part of a full suite of leather horse trappings, bridles, reins, and breastplates, all meticulously stitched and fitted. This equipment transformed horse and rider into a single coordinated unit, a mobile platform of immense force on the battlefield. In every aspect, leather provided what metal and wood could not: flexibility, shock absorption, and silent durability. The legionary's effectiveness was a symphony of materials, and leather conducted the movement. It allowed his armor to articulate, it cushioned his body from relentless impacts, it secured his helmet, and it gave him a firm seat atop his horse. When we reduced the Roman military machine to its gleaming swords and imposing armor, we missed the soft, strong layer that made it all work. The empire was not just built on iron discipline, it was marched forward on soles of leather, shielded by leather and armored quite literally from the inside out by it. The battlefield's practical leather found its polar opposite in the roaring amphitheater. Here, leather was not just about survival, it was about spectacle, a dramatic costume designed for both protection and performance under the glaring sun. The gladiator's gear was a carefully calibrated balance, offering vital defense where needed while leaving other areas conspicuously exposed to heighten the drama and risk for the baying crowd. Take the manica, the armored sleeve worn on the sword arm. This was often constructed from layered strips of thick leather, sometimes reinforced with metal scales or plates, meticulously laced or buckled from wrist to shoulder. Its purpose was brutally straightforward: to protect the fighter's weapon arm, his most valuable asset, from slashing blows without sacrificing the mobility needed to swing a heavy sword or trident. On his legs he wore greaves, while often made of bronze for the most celebrated fighters. Many gladiators, especially those lower on the bill, wore greaves fashioned from boiled and molded leather. This hardened leather, known as cuir bouilli, could be surprisingly resilient, deflecting glancing strikes and protecting the shins, a frequent target in combat. Yet for all this armor, the gladiator's torso was often startlingly bare, clad only in a simple loincloth called the sublegaculum. This was a stark visual contrast, emphasizing the human vulnerability at the heart of the violent spectacle. The most iconic piece, however, was the helmet. These were formidable, full-face enclosures of bronze or iron, designed to deflect direct blows to the head. But inside that intimidating metal shell was once again a crucial layer of leather. A padded leather cap, stitched and stuffed with wool or horsehair, cushioned the gladiator's head, absorbing the shock of impacts that would otherwise rattle his skull and stun him into defenselessness. This lining was as vital as the metal itself, allowing the fighter to remain conscious and combative, and rising from that helmet, often mounted through a leather socket, was the magnificent crest, a cascade of horsehair or feathers dyed in vibrant colors. This plume was pure theater, a brilliant identifier that allowed even the spectators in the highest tiers to follow their favorite combatant across the bloodied sand. But the craftsmanship went deeper than plumes and plating. The leather itself was a canvas for showmanship. Surviving pieces and depictions show greaves and manicas adorned with elaborate tooling, stamped with images of gods, victory laurels, or mythical beasts. These were not mere decorations, they were branding. A gladiator was a star, and his gear promoted his persona, the fierce Retiarius with his net and trident, or the heavily armored Murmillo. The tooling told a story, building a legend for the crowd to invest in. The leather was dyed too, not just in military reds but in rich purples and blues, catching the light with every movement. In the arena, every piece of leather served a dual purpose. The manica guarded a life while its gleaming scales dazzled the eye. The helmet's lining preserved consciousness while its towering crest commanded attention. This was leather transformed from a material of utility into a prop in the grand, brutal drama of Roman life, where the line between armored protection and theatrical costume was as thin as the blade of a gladius. Leather's role in the arena was dramatic, but its true empire was built on the road. Beyond the spectacle, this material was the quiet, relentless engine of Roman mobility, the flexible fabric that connected distant provinces and supplied far-flung legions. Every journey, whether a merchant's caravan snaking across a desert or a century of soldiers marching toward a new frontier, depended on a suite of leather goods engineered for endurance. At the heart of this system were the animals. The Roman saddle, with its 4 leather-covered horns, gave the cavalryman his seat, but it was just one piece of an intricate harness. A horse or mule's bridle, reins, and breastplate were all meticulously crafted from thick, vegetable tan strips, cut, punched, and stitched to withstand constant pulling and chafing. These were not simple ropes, they were adjustable systems of buckles and straps, allowing a driver to control a team of animals with precision. The stitching on a harness was some of the strongest on any artifact, often using sinew thread that would shrink and lock the seams tighter with every mile. Without this reliable leather tack, the movement of goods, messages, and troops would have slowed to a crawl. For the infantryman carrying his world on his back, leather provided the container. Each soldier carried a loculus, a rectangular satchel made from a single piece of sturdy hide. It was more than a bag, it was a portable locker. His personal effects, a change of tunic, his rations of hardtack, and perhaps a small bronze cooking pot would all be secured inside. The loculus was designed for hard use, with reinforced stitching at the stress points and leather straps that allowed it to be securely lashed to his marching pack. When the legion made camp, that same leather satchel became a pillow, a seat, or a dry storage place in a muddy ditch. On a larger scale, the wagons that followed the army, carrying the siege engines, the commander's tent, and the bulk grain supplies, were shielded by leather covers. These vast tarps, made from panels of oiled hide stitched together, kept the empire's vital cargo dry under rain or baking sun. They were the mobile roofs of the military machine. Perhaps the most critical leather item for any traveler, however, held not goods but life itself. The euter or water skin was a masterpiece of simple design. Made from the entire hide of a goat or sheep, tanned and sealed, it was a flexible, lightweight canteen. One opening would be tied shut while the other, usually a leg, served as a spout, stoppered with a carved wooden plug. Its genius was in its form. As water was consumed, the skin would collapse, preventing the sloshing and airspace that could spoil water in a rigid clay vessel. A soldier on patrol could sling it over his shoulder and it would conform to his body, not bang against his armor. For longer journeys or different cargo, the same principle applied to wine sacks. These larger skins, often carried by mules, kept wine from oxidizing as quickly, allowing tastes of home or the comforts of vintage to travel hundreds of miles. The smell of wine slowly permeating the leather over years would have been a familiar scent in any merchant's caravan. Every item, from the general's detailed map case to the mule driver's whip, relied on this one material's unique combination of strength, flexibility, and resilience. The empire's famous roads provided the path, but it was leather that carried the load, one supple, enduring step at a time. The road's dust and the arena's roar were left at the threshold. Inside the Roman home, leather took on a softer, more intimate role, woven into the very fabric of comfort and quiet daily life. Step into a well-appointed domus, and you would find it softened and shaped by this versatile material. The rigid frames of dining couches where families reclined for meals were made inviting with thick leather cushions stuffed with wool or feathers. These weren't crude pads but carefully stitched and sometimes even dyed items, providing comfort for hours of conversation. Chairs and stools, too, often had seats of stretched and tacked leather, durable enough to withstand constant use yet gentle on fine tunics. In wealthier households, leather even adorned the walls. Tooled and dyed hides could serve as decorative hangings, adding warmth and texture to a room while displaying the family's taste and means. This was leather as a domestic art, creating an environment of cultivated ease. Beyond decoration, leather was the silent organizer of the household. Storage was a constant concern, and leather bags of all sizes were the solution. From large sacks for holding grain in the storeroom to delicate drawstring pouches for keeping jewelry or coins secure, leather containers were everywhere. They were flexible, sturdy, and importantly, could be tightly closed against dust and pests. A merchant might have his accounts recorded on a wax tablet, but for important documents, correspondence, and literature, the material of choice was parchment. This too was a form of leather, made from the stretched, scraped, and dried skins of sheep or goats. The smooth, writable surface of parchment allowed for the preservation of everything from legal contracts and poetry to personal letters, forming the literal pages of Roman thought and administration that have survived to tell their stories. Even leisure and family life were touched by leather. Children played with balls made from inflated animal bladders or stitched leather hides, kicking them in courtyards in games that would seem familiar today. A father teaching his son to write might use a leather satchel to carry those wax tablets and styluses. The lady of the house might own an ornate leather vanity case holding her combs, mirrors, and cosmetics. In the kitchen, leather washers sealed lids on storage jars, and leather bellows breathed life into cooking fires. From the moment one rose from a leather-cushioned bed to the evening spent reading by lamplight from a parchment scroll, this material provided a layer of quiet, reliable convenience. It bridged the gap between the home's sturdy stone walls and the need for softness, portability, and personal touch. The empire was built on military leather and moved on transport leather, but it was lived in quite comfortably on domestic leather. This everyday intimacy makes the surviving artifacts so profoundly moving, for they are not just tools of state or war, but echoes of private life, of small comforts and daily rituals that made a house a home. But who were the hands behind this essential, omnipresent material? The story of Roman leather is not just about objects, it is about people and the complex social machine that produced them. At the heart of this industry stood two key figures, the curarius and the suitor. The curarius was the tanner, the alchemist who transformed raw hides into workable leather through those long, smelly processes. The suitor was the shoemaker and leatherworker, the craftsman who cut, stitched, and shaped the tanned hides into the final products. These were not solitary artisans working in obscurity. In towns and cities across the empire, they were almost always organized into professional guilds, known as collegia. A collegium was more than just a trade association. It provided a social safety net, a sense of identity, and a powerful collective voice. Members paid dues which funded burials for poorer members and sometimes even communal feasts. The guild could set standards for craftsmanship, regulate apprenticeships, and negotiate with civic authorities. For a curarius or a suitor, membership in a collegium meant you were part of a recognized, respected body, a vital cog in the urban economy. This structure ensured the knowledge of tanning and leatherworking was passed down systematically from master to apprentice, preserving techniques across generations. The location of their workshops was no accident. If you follow your nose in a Roman town, you would find the tanneries, the curarii, were almost always situated on the outskirts, or more precisely, downstream from the main settlement, along a river. This was a practical and public health necessity. The overwhelming stench from the soaking pits of urine and decomposing organic matter was considered a profound nuisance. The Roman writer Cicero even used the smell of a tannery as a metaphor for something utterly repulsive. The process also required vast amounts of clean water for rinsing the hides, and a flowing river provided both a water source and a way to carry the foul runoff away from populated areas. So while their product was indispensable, the tanners themselves were physically marginalized. their work literally relegated to the wrong side of the tracks. This shaped their social status. Tanning was dirty, difficult, and malodorous work. It was not a profession for the elite or even the aspiring middle class. It was a trade often passed down in families, viewed with a mix of disdain and grudging dependence. The shoemakers and leatherworkers, the suitors, often had shops closer to the commercial heart of the city, in the Forum or along main streets, but their connection to the low-status tanner was clear. They were all part of the same supply chain, yet here lies a fascinating contradiction. While the work was considered foul, it could be remarkably profitable. Leather was in constant, massive demand by the state for the military, by merchants for transport, and by every citizen for daily life. A successful tannery owner or a master shoemaker with a coveted clientele could accumulate significant wealth. Archaeological evidence from Pompeii shows some leatherworkers living in quite comfortable homes. Their social standing might not have been high, but their economic power could be very real. They were essential capitalists in a pre-industrial world, turning the byproducts of the empire's vast agricultural and military complex into one of its most critical commodities. The guild system protected that economic interest. It allowed these vital but maligned craftsmen to build community, amass influence, and ensure their indispensable, if unscented, craft endured for as long as Rome itself required sandals, saddles, and shields. The guilds ensured quality, but the empire's vast geography demanded local genius. Roman leatherworking was never a single, rigid formula imposed from Rome. It was a living craft that bent and adapted, absorbing local wisdom from the misty highlands of Britannia to the sun-scorched deserts of Syria. The finds from a waterlogged fort like Vindolanda tell one story, a story of vegetable tanned leather perfected for damp, cool climates. But travel to the sands of Egypt and the narrative changes dramatically. Here in the arid tombs and trash heaps of Roman settlements, leather survives not because of anaerobic mud, but because of utter dryness. The desert acts as a natural desiccator, pulling all moisture from objects and leaving them perfectly preserved in a state of suspended animation. The leather found here is often thinner, lighter, and reflects a different approach. In a land where oak trees were scarce, tanners turned to what they had. Local acacia pods or the leaves of the sunt tree provided the necessary tannins, producing leather with a distinct character, perhaps softer and more supple to suit a hotter climate. The styles too adapted. Footwear from Egypt might feature more open work for ventilation, or use local dyes like safflower to achieve brilliant yellows not commonly seen in the north. This adaptability went beyond just materials. It absorbed pre-Roman traditions. In the eastern provinces of Syria and Judea, Roman leatherworking met ancient, sophisticated craft practices that long predated the legions. Local artisans had been working leather for centuries, developing their own distinctive tooling patterns, stitching methods, and preferences for certain animal skins. When Rome arrived, it did not erase these traditions. Instead, it often integrated them. A Roman-style military satchel made in a Syrian workshop might be stitched with a local spiral thread technique or decorated with geometric tooling patterns that echoed much older, Near Eastern designs. The Roman military was a massive, consistent consumer, but it likely cared more about the function and durability of a piece of horse harness than the specific cultural origin of its decorative stamp. This created a fascinating hybridity. A cavalry saddle found on the eastern frontier could be fundamentally Roman in its four-horn design, yet covered in leather tooled with Parthian-inspired motifs of griffins or palmettes, a silent testament to the craftsman's own heritage. Even within the empire's heart, regional needs shaped the craft. In the alpine regions where snow and cold were the enemies, leatherworkers might produce sturdier, fur-lined boots, a practical response utterly unnecessary in the forums of Rome or the streets of Alexandria. The famous Roman talent for standardization, so evident in their brick sizes and road widths, met its match in the organic, localized world of leather. The empire provided the demand, the trade routes, and the broad template, but the hands that did the work filled in the details with the pigments, plants, and patterns of their homeland. This is not a sign of weakness in Roman craft, but its greatest strength. It was a system flexible enough to outfit a legionary on the rainy Scottish border with hobnailed caligy tanned with local oak bark, and a merchant on the Silk Road with a delicate sumac tan pouch decorated with motifs from the edges of the world. The leather itself became a map, its very fibers charting the blend of imperial need and local identity. This remarkable adaptability meant Roman leather traveled to every corner of the known world, but its survival for us to find was never guaranteed. Each artifact we see today is a victor in a silent 2,000-year war against decay. The central mystery is not just how the Romans made their leather so well, but why any of it remains at all. Organic material like leather is time's favorite meal. Bacteria, fungi, moisture, and oxygen all conspire to break it down, returning it to the earth. In typical soil conditions, a leather sandal will be consumed within a few decades, leaving behind only a rusty hobnail or a faint stain in the dirt to hint at its existence. This makes every single complete leather object pulled from the ground a minor miracle, a defiance of the natural order. So what were the magical conditions that pressed pause on this process? The answer lies in two extreme environments that act as nature's own preservation vaults. The first is the waterlogged, oxygen-starved environment. Think of the deep mud at a place like Vindolanda, or the bottom of an ancient well, or the depths of a peat bog. In these settings, the object is quickly submerged in water that has little to no oxygen, a state called anaerobic. Without oxygen, the bacteria and fungi that normally feast on leather cannot survive. The decomposition process grinds to a halt. The leather is essentially pickled in a cold, dark, timeless bath. This is why the shoes from Vindolanda are so perfectly preserved, with stitching intact and where patterns still visible. The water itself becomes a protective cocoon. The second environment is the polar opposite, the extremely dry, arid climate. The deserts of Egypt or the Near East act as giant desiccators. Here the enemy is not microbes but moisture, and there is none. The relentless heat and dry air pull every bit of water out of the leather, leaving it brittle but intact. Without moisture, there is no medium for biological decay to occur. The object is freeze-dried by the sun and sand, locked in a state of perfect dryness for centuries. These two extremes, the perpetually wet and the perpetually dry, create the exceptional time capsules that gift us with these tangible pieces of the past. Any leather found in normal, temperate soil, with its cycles of wet and dry and its teeming microbial life, is almost always just a crumbling ghost of itself. So when we marvel at a child's shoe from a Roman fort, we are not just looking at clever craftsmanship, we are looking at a lottery winner, an object that had the incredible luck to be lost in exactly the wrong or right place to cheat time itself. The lottery of preservation gives us the objects, but modern science now hands us the keys to their deepest secrets. For decades, archaeologists could only describe what they saw, the shape of a shoe, the color of a dye. Today they can peer into the very molecules that make it up, reverse engineering the Roman recipe book, one microscopic clue at a time. The first tool is incredibly powerful magnification. Using high-powered microscopes, scientists can examine the collagen fiber structure of the leather itself. The way these fibers are arranged and bonded tells a vivid story. Leather that was taught with alum will show a very different pattern than leather that underwent the long vegetable tanning process. The microscope can even reveal the direction and force of the scraping tools used 2,000 years ago, the ghostly grooves left by a tanner's blade as he cleaned the hide, frozen at a cellular level. But the science goes deeper still. Imagine taking a tiny pinhead-sized sample from a Roman waterskin found in the Egyptian desert. Through DNA analysis, researchers can now identify the exact species of animal that gave it skin. Was it a cow, a goat, or a sheep? This is not trivial information. It speaks to economy and purpose. A cow hide is thick and tough, ideal for a soldier's tent or a heavy shield covering. A goat skin is thinner and more pliable, perfect for a delicate pouch or that flexible water carrier. Knowing the animal tells us about the choices Romans made, matching material to function with precise intent. Even more astonishing is residue analysis. Scientists use techniques like mass spectrometry to detect minute chemical traces left in the leather. They can find the molecular fingerprints of the tannins themselves. This is how we can confirm the use of oak bark in a British fort, or detect the presence of sumac in a Syrian saddle. The science can distinguish between them. It can also find the traces of post-tanning treatments, like fish oils rubbed in for waterproofing, or the metallic mordants like alum that were used to fix vibrant dyes to the surface. We can now know with chemical certainty that a faded scrap of leather was once a brilliant red, colored with madder root fixed with an alum mordant. This turns abstract historical descriptions into confirmed tactile reality. We are no longer just guessing at recipes mentioned in ancient texts. We are reading the recipe that was actually used, written in atoms and molecules on the object itself. Each analysis is like listening to a faint ancient whisper, using technology to amplify it into a clear voice telling us exactly how it was made, what it was made from, and where its components might have traveled from. The tanner's secret guild knowledge, lost for millennia, is slowly being decoded not from a scroll, but from the leather their hands created. Chemical whispers from ancient leather are one thing, but to truly hear the past, you must sometimes get your hands dirty. This is the world of experimental archaeology, where theory meets the physical reality of a vat of oak bark and a raw hide. Across the globe, dedicated historians and master leatherworkers are rolling up their sleeves to do more than just analyze Roman leather. They are trying to recreate it, step by painstaking step, using only the tools and materials the Romans had. These are not simple demonstrations, they are rigorous scientific experiments designed to answer practical questions that artifacts alone cannot. How long did that oak bark tanning really take? How did the smell of the tannery permeate the surrounding area? And just how durable was leather made with 2,000-year-old technology? One remarkable project took place in the United Kingdom, where a team partnered with a traditional tanner to follow the full Roman process. They began with a fresh ox hide, just as a Coriarius would have. They soaked it in a solution not of chemicals, but of wood, ash, and water, a documented ancient method for loosening hair. Then came the laborious scraping on a replica fleshing beam, removing every bit of flesh and fat by hand. The real test began with the vegetable tanning. They filled a series of pits with a broth made from pounds of crushed oak bark, just as the archaeological and chemical residue evidence suggested. Then they waited. They moved the hide from a weak solution to a stronger one over the course of many months, monitoring its progress. The final product, when it emerged after nearly a full year, was a revelation. It was a deep, rich brown, incredibly thick and dense, yet surprisingly flexible. When tested, it proved to be exceptionally water-resistant and tough, far more so than most modern, chemically tanned leathers. This single experiment validated the core Roman method, showing that the long wait was not inefficiency, but the secret to its legendary durability. The time investment was staggering, but the result was a material built for centuries. Other experiments focus on the tools and the physical experience. Craftspeople have used replica Roman scrapers and knives on prepared hides, studying the marks they leave and comparing them to the microscopic wear patterns on ancient artifacts. They've pounded leather with heavy wooden mallets for hours, learning firsthand how much effort it took to achieve the desired suppleness. These hands-on trials reveal the immense skill and intuition required. A modern tanner might rely on a pH meter, but a Roman Coriarius judged the strength of his tanning liquor by taste and touch, a knowledge earned through a lifetime of experience. By attempting these lost techniques, modern experimenters gain a profound respect for the Roman craftsman's expertise. They feel the ache in their shoulders from scraping, they smell the pungent truth of the tannery, and they witness the slow, magical transformation that no written description can fully convey. But experimental archaeology doesn't just confirm theories, it sometimes challenges them. One project attempted to recreate the alum tawing process for a soft, white leather. Following historical accounts, they used alum, salt, flour, and egg yolks. The result was a beautifully soft, white leather, just as described. However, when they deliberately got it wet, as might happen to a glove or garment, it stiffened dramatically, just as the old text warned. This simple physical test made the historical preference for vegetable tan, leather for military and outdoor gear instantly, viscerally understandable. Another experiment explored dyeing. By recreating a madder root dye bath with an alum mordant, they could see exactly how many hides a single batch could color and how consistent the shade was, giving clues about the scale and standardization possible in a Roman workshop. These projects turn abstract historical notes into tangible, sometimes messy reality. They bridge the gap between the artifact in the case and the living, breathing craft that produced it. Each successful or even failed experiment peels back another layer, not by analyzing the past, but by temporarily re-inhabiting it, letting the silent tools and processes speak through the work of modern hands. A single spectacular find can sometimes speak louder than 1,000 fragments. Among the countless leather artifacts recovered from the damp earth of the empire, two stand out not just for their preservation, but for the stories of status, skill, and personal identity they carry. The first is a piece of martial splendor, discovered not on a battlefield, but buried in the mud of the River Walbrook in the heart of London. This is the famous London helmet, an ornate bronze cavalry parade helmet from the late 1st century. Its metal is breathtaking, adorned with the intricate scene of a warrior and a goddess. But for our story, the true treasure is what time almost stole, the fragile organic material that made the helmet functional. Miraculously, parts of its original leather lining survived inside the bronze shell. Even more remarkably, the delicate leather ties that once secured the helmet's movable cheek pieces were preserved, their thin strips still showing the precise knots and loops that allowed a rider to fasten his protection snugly beneath his chin. This isn't just decoration, it's engineering. Those leather ties were the critical interface between the glorious heavy metal and the living, breathing soldier. They allow the cheek pieces to pivot with the movement of his head, giving him both protection and vital peripheral vision. The London helmet tells a dual tale of the empire's public display of power in gleaming bronze and the private, practical comfort ensured by simple, perfectly executed leatherwork. For a story of everyday artistry far from the capital, we travel north to the rain-lashed frontier of Scotland, to the Roman fort of Bar Hill. Here, from the same kind of waterlogged conditions that preserved Vindolanda, archaeologists recovered a boot. Not just any boot, but one of the most perfectly preserved examples of Roman footwear ever found. It is a closed boot, likely belonging to a woman or child, constructed from a single piece of high-quality leather. Its survival is astonishing, with the sole, upper, and even the delicate drawstring closure at the top all intact. But what truly sets the Bar Hill boot apart is its decoration. The entire surface is covered in an elaborate, incised geometric pattern, a series of precise circles, dots, and lines meticulously punched into the leather when it was soft. This was not a hasty frontier repair or a purely utilitarian object. This was a carefully crafted, beautiful item. The time and skill required to create such consistent, decorative tooling on a personal boot reveals something profound. Even at the edge of the known world, hundreds of miles from Rome, the Roman appreciation for craftsmanship and personal adornment thrived. Someone at Bar Hill Fort, perhaps the wife or daughter of a soldier stationed at this remote outpost, owned and wore a boot that would have been considered fine in any provincial town. It speaks of a need for identity and beauty, a refusal to let the harsh environment strip away all civility. The boot's decoration is a silent declaration, a statement that even here on the frontier, people lived full lives, cared about aesthetics, and had access to a leatherworker skilled enough to turn a simple necessity into a personal treasure. When we place the London helmet and the Bar Hill boot side by side, we see the full spectrum of Roman leather. One represents the pinnacle of military ceremonial gear, where leather served elite function. The other represents the pervasive human desire for artistry, where leather became a canvas for individual expression in the most unlikely of places. Both survived against all odds, waiting to tell us that the empire was built not just on steel and discipline, but on the careful knot of a tie and the deliberate punch of a decorative tool. The decorative boot from Bar Hill was a personal choice, but for the Roman state, leather was far too important to leave to chance. This was a material that armored soldiers, transported legions, and sealed military dispatches. Its failure could mean a lost battle, a broken supply line, or a drowned messenger. So Rome did what it did best: it bureaucratized excellence. While we lack a complete leatherworker's manual, scattered evidence from legal codes and imperial edicts suggests the state took a direct and sometimes heavy-handed interest in the quality of this strategic resource. We see hints of this in the famous legal digest compiled under Emperor Justinian centuries later, which preserved earlier Roman legal thought. It contains discussions on the liability of a shoemaker or suitor for faulty work. If a shoe fell apart prematurely due to poor craftsmanship, the maker could be held responsible. This wasn't just a matter of customer satisfaction. It established a principle of professional accountability that would have been especially critical for suppliers to the army. More concrete are the edicts on prices and wages issued by Emperor Diocletian in the late 3rd century. His edict on maximum prices was a desperate attempt to control rampant inflation. and it listed the maximum allowable prices for hundreds of goods and services. Among them were specific types of leather footwear and raw hides. By setting a price ceiling, the state was effectively trying to standardize the economic value of these items, which indirectly implies an expected standard of quality for a given price. You could not legally sell a shoddy, thinly tanned hide at the price of a premium one. This edict shouts the central importance of leather to the everyday economy and the state's need to regulate its commerce, especially during a crisis. For the military, the stakes were infinitely higher and the control was likely far more direct. While no papyrus order survives saying, "Make all tents this thick," the archaeological evidence points to a system of standardization that implies strict oversight. Consider the tents that housed a legion. These were not makeshift tarps, but complex assemblies of large, uniform leather panels designed to interlock. For this system to work on a mass scale, supplying legions across 3 continents, the leather had to be of a consistent weight, thickness, and tanning quality. It is hard to believe this consistency was achieved through casual agreements with local tanners. It is far more likely that the army or its contracted suppliers enforced precise specifications. The most tantalizing clue for this kind of control is the occasional appearance of stamp marks on military leather goods. From sites in Britain and elsewhere, archaeologists have found pieces of tent leather, horse harnesses, and even shoes bearing small, impressed marks. These are not decorative tooling. They are concise, often consisting of letters, numbers, or simple symbols like a circle or a cross. Their meaning is debated, but the leading theory is that they are official stamps, a form of ancient quality assurance or property marking. One stamp might indicate the legion that commissioned the gear, say the 20th Legion, stamped as LEGXX. Another could be a batch number or the mark of a specific workshop contracted by the army. A third might be the mark of the soldier himself, applied when he received his gear and became responsible for it. This practice mirrors the stamps found on Roman military pottery and bricks, which were used to track production and assign responsibility. A stamp on a piece of leather transformed it from a generic commodity into a traceable item. If a tent panel ripped prematurely during a storm on campaign, the quartermaster could, in theory, trace it back to a particular batch or supplier. This created a chain of accountability from the tanner's vat to the frontier fort. It was a system built on distrust as much as efficiency, ensuring that the craftsman or the state-owned workshop stood behind their work. The absence of such stamps on purely civilian leather goods from the same period is telling. It suggests that this marking system was a uniquely military or state-driven practice, born from the empire's relentless need for reliable equipment. So when we look at a simple stamped piece of tent leather, we are not just looking at an animal skin, we are looking at an early line item in a military budget, a product that passed an inspection, and a tangible fragment of the Roman belief that even something as organic as leather could and must be governed by rules. That stamp of military approval was a mark of order, but the world that produced it was one of profound disorder. For all its polished final products, the Roman leather industry had a dark, pungent underbelly, a reality far removed from the gleaming artifacts in our museums. The true cost of this indispensable material was paid daily in the nostrils and lungs of the people who made it, and in the very environment of the cities they lived in. The most immediate and unforgettable aspect was the smell. Roman tanneries did not have a mild, earthy odor. They produced a horrific, choking stench that became legendary. The process of soaking hides to remove hair and flesh often used pools of stagnant water mixed with lime or, very commonly, human urine. In a society without industrial chemicals, urine was a readily available source of ammonia, a powerful agent for breaking down organic matter. It was collected systematically from public latrines and chamber pots, creating a steady, foul-smelling supply line to the tannery district. Combine this with the scent of decaying animal flesh, hair, and the various dung pastes used in preliminary treatments, and you have an olfactory assault that defined an entire neighborhood. The Roman statesman and writer Cicero used the expression "to be led past the tannery" as a metaphor for being subjected to something utterly disgusting and unbearable. This wasn't just a nuisance, it was a powerful social marker. The overwhelming stench led to tanneries being legally banished to the very outskirts of cities, always placed downstream along a river. This served two grim purposes. It removed the smell from the central residential and commercial areas, and it used the flowing water to carry the toxic runoff away. The tanners, the Corairii, were thus physically and socially marginalized. Their work was vital, but it made them outcasts, living and laboring in a perpetual miasma that the rest of society wanted firmly downwind. The health hazards for these workers were severe and constant. They spent their days immersed in an environment rife with biological and chemical dangers. The pits of decomposing organic matter and human waste were breeding grounds for bacteria and parasites. Cuts and scrapes, inevitable when handling hides and sharp tools, were highly susceptible to infection in such filthy conditions. Lung ailments would have been common from inhaling the caustic dust from lime and the airborne particles from dried dung and decaying materials. The long-term exposure to the ammonia fumes from the urine vats could cause chronic respiratory problems and eye damage. We have no Roman occupational health records, but we can look to tanneries in the pre-industrial era for a grim reflection, where workers suffered from skin ulcers, respiratory failure, and lowered life expectancy. The Roman tanner was engaged in a brutal, unglamorous fight against putrefaction, and he did so with his own body on the front lines. This gritty reality adds a crucial layer of understanding. The beautiful, durable leather of a centurion's glove or a child's shoe was not born in a clean workshop. It was born in a foul-smelling yard on the edge of town, through the skill and sacrifice of workers whose lives were literally steeped in the process. Their craft turned the raw byproducts of the city, its slaughtered animals and its human waste, into the material that shod, shielded, and sustained an empire. The next time you see a perfectly preserved Roman sandal, remember not just the foot that wore it, but the hands that made it, hands that worked in the empire's most necessary and repulsive shadows. The foul air of the tannery was a world away from the quiet incense of a temple, yet leather held a sacred place in Roman spiritual life. This versatile material bridged the gap between the earthly and the divine, serving as a vessel for ritual, a protector of sacred words, and a carrier of personal belief. For certain priesthoods, leather was part of the uniform of faith. The Salian priests, who performed ancient rites to Mars, the god of war, wore a distinctive apron made of leather, known as an apex. This was not a practical garment for a workshop, but a ceremonial one, its very material perhaps symbolizing durability and a connection to the animal world, a reminder of the raw forces they sought to channel and appease. Beyond clothing, leather provided sanctuary for sacred knowledge. While important texts were often on papyrus scrolls, the most precious or frequently used ritual instructions might be copied onto more durable parchment, which is, of course, a form of leather. The smooth, resilient surface could withstand the repeated handling of priests consulting prayers or procedures during a sacrifice. Imagine a temple attendant carefully unrolling a parchment sheet to ensure the correct words were spoken for a state ceremony, the leather crackling softly in the solemn air. Leather also crossed into the deeply personal realm of superstition and magic. Small pouches made from leather, worn around the neck, could serve as amulets. Inside, a person might place a written spell, a rare herb, or a carved symbol, believing the leather itself would contain and amplify the protective power. There is evidence from other ancient cultures, and likely in Roman folk practice, of using leather from a specific animal for luck, perhaps a rabbit's foot for speed or a piece of wolf hide for courage. Even something as ordinary as footwear could carry superstition. The first wearing of a new pair of sandals might be accompanied by a small ritual or a hopeful thought for a safe journey, a tradition echoing into our own time. Leather's role extended to the final journey as well. In some burials, particularly in frontier regions or among soldiers, a person might be interred with their favorite pair of boots or a leather pouch containing personal tokens. This was more than sentiment, it was a practical superstition, equipping the soul for the unknown road ahead with familiar, durable goods. A child buried with a tiny leather ball wasn't just given a toy, but a piece of home, a comfort for eternity crafted from the same material that shielded soldiers and bound books of law. In this way, leather wrapped a Roman life from its spiritual ceremonies to its final rest, a humble material trusted to hold everything from holy words to heartfelt hopes. That sacred and practical journey of leather did not end with the fall of Rome. When the empire's political structure crumbled, its crafts did not simply vanish into the dark ages. Instead, they became a quiet inheritance, passed down through generations of hands that still needed to make shoes, saddles, and bags. The most profound legacy is the core technique itself, vegetable tanning. The Roman method of patiently soaking hides in solutions of oak bark, sumac, or other tannin-rich plants did not require a complex state to sustain it. It required local trees, water, and knowledge, and so it persisted essentially unchanged for over 1,000 years. In the monasteries of medieval Europe, where monks needed durable bindings for their manuscripts and sturdy footwear for their labors, the Roman tanning process continued. The tanneries of the Middle Ages, often still relegated to the edges of towns near rivers, were using the exact same chemical principles, if not the identical recipes, as the corrierii of Pompeii. The slow, months-long process in bark pits remained the gold standard for creating strong, weather-resistant leather until the invention of modern chrome tanning in the 19th century. Even today, vegetable tanning is revered by artisans and high-end leatherworkers for the rich, natural character it imparts, a direct technological lineage stretching back 2 millennia. But the legacy is more than just chemistry in a vat. Look at the stitches, the robust sewing techniques developed for Roman military gear, the butt seams for flexibility, and the reinforced running stitches for strength, formed the foundational grammar of Western leatherworking. A medieval saddler stitching a knight's war saddle, or a Renaissance bookbinder assembling a thick folio, was employing methods refined in Roman workshops. The very tools show this stubborn continuity: the shape of a head knife used to cut leather, the design of a stitching awl to punch holes, even the use of a wooden slicker to burnish edges. These tools evolved slowly from Roman prototypes. When you watch a modern master leathercrafter hand stitching a wallet with a saddle stitch, pulling 2 needles in opposite directions to create an incredibly durable lock stitch, they are performing a maneuver that would be instantly recognizable to a Roman suitor repairing a centurion sword belt. The fundamental problems of the craft never changed: how to join pieces strongly, how to finish edges cleanly, how to mold flat material into a 3-dimensional form. The Roman solutions were so elegant and effective that they became the default, embedded in the muscle memory of the trade. This enduring technical legacy means that a piece of high-quality vegetable tan leather on an artisan's bench today is not just a material, it is a living artifact. Its rich patina develops from the same tannins. Its scent is the scent of oak and thyme, a smell a Roman tanner would know, the thud of a mallet softening it, the pull of a thread through an awl hole. These are sensations that transcend centuries. In a very real way, when we preserve and study a Roman sandal, we are not just looking at a relic of a dead civilization, we are looking at the direct ancestor of the craft that still makes the finest leather goods in our world. The empire fell, but its hands, through the persistence of technique, never truly stopped working. Yet for all we have reconstructed, the Roman leatherworker's craft still holds its secrets close. The chemical whispers we can now detect tell us what they used, but not always the precise ratios, the exact timing, or the guarded family tricks that turned a good piece of leather into a legendary one. We know they used oak bark and sumac, but what were the full recipes for their most prized, supple leathers, the kind mentioned in poetry, leather as soft as woven cloth, used for the finest gloves or the lining of a senator's litter? Was it a specific blend of barks, a longer soak in a weaker solution, or a secret post-tanning rub of imported oils that gave it that exceptional hand? Those proprietary formulas, the competitive edge of a master corriereus, died with the last apprentice who memorized them. They left no written cookbook, only the tantalizing results. Then there is the question of color and extravagance. We have found evidence of dyes, yes, but how widespread was colored and gilded leather in everyday life? Our view is skewed by preservation. The vibrant reds and yellows fade in waterlogged mud, and gold leaf flakes away. Were the streets of Rome and Antioch actually a riot of colored leather, with awnings, shop signs, and horse trappings creating a kaleidoscope against the white marble? Or was such polychrome brilliance reserved strictly for the elite, for state processions, and for the theater? And what of gilding? We have stunning examples of gilded leather from later periods in history, but from Rome, the evidence is scant. Did they press thin gold leaf onto tooled leather for imperial ceremonies? A single undiscovered fragment in a dry tomb could rewrite our entire mental image of Roman opulence. Perhaps the greatest mystery lies not in the objects, but in the places that made them. We have found the tools and the waste pits, but are there entire preserved tanning complexes yet to be discovered? Imagine a Pompeii-level preservation of a full tannery district, not just a single workshop, a place where the vats still hold their last batch of bark, where drying racks stand with hides frozen in time, and where a master's ledger, perhaps on a wax tablet, lists his clients and recipes. Such a site would be an archaeological treasure beyond measure, a direct window into the industry scale, noise, and organized filth. It could show us the full layout, from the foul-soaking pits at the river's edge to the cleaner finishing workshops upwind. It could reveal how many hides were processed in a week and how the workers moved between the different stages of this smelly, vital assembly line. These unanswered questions are not failures of science, but invitations. They remind us that history is not a puzzle we will ever completely solve. It is a conversation, and every new scrap of leather pulled from the ground, every new molecular analysis, adds another sentence. We are left to wonder about the lost recipes, the faded rainbows, and the undiscovered workshops. What secret, known only to a tanner in a Gaulish town, made his leather the most sought after by the legions? What spectacular gilded saddle, now returned to dust, once carried an emperor in triumph? The very fact that these mysteries persist keeps the story alive, urging us to look closer at the next humble fragment, because it might just hold the key to a splendor we have only begun to imagine. The secrets of Roman leather are not just in the chemistry of oak bark or the geometry of a stitch. They are in the totality of the journey, from the stench of the tannery to the silent endurance in mud and sand. This material was more than a commodity. It was a foundational layer of an entire civilization. It shod the legions that expanded the empire, armored the gladiators who entertained it, cushioned the homes that comforted it, and carried the goods that sustained it. Every step of its creation, from the brutal scraping on a fleshing beam to the patient pounding of a mallet, was an act of transformation, turning the perishable into the permanent. And that is the ultimate marvel. When we stand before a museum case, gazing at a sandal or a child's boot, we are not looking at a symbol or a representation. We are looking at the thing itself. That precise pattern of hobnails was hammered in by a specific hand. The curve of that worn heel perfectly matches the gait of a person who has been dust for 2,000 years. The careful repair on a tiny tear was stitched by someone who cared for the object, and perhaps for the child who wore it. This is the rarest kind of history, a tactile link. We can see the tool marks, we can trace the stitches, we can almost feel the suppleness that a Roman craftsman worked into the fibers. So the next time you visit a museum and pass a display of ancient artifacts, pause at the leather. Do not hurry by the humble shoe or the fragment of a tent. Look closely, see the wear, imagine the hand that made the cut, and consider the life that depended on its strength. In that simple, enduring piece of tanned hide, you are as close to touching the Roman world as you will ever be. We would love to hear which piece of this story resonated most with you. Was it the military engineering of the legionaries' caliga, the personal artistry of the Bar Hill boot, or the sheer scale of the Vindolanda finds? Tell us in the comments which Roman leather artifact you find most fascinating and why.